The rise of the Goths and their clash with Rome. It was a moment that shook the ancient world, one that few Romans could have ever imagined. In August of 410 AD, Rome, the heart of an empire that had once ruled over vast stretches of the known world, fell to the Visigoths under King Alaric. The city, which had stood undefeated for over 800 years, had finally met its match, not at the hands of another great empire, but by a people whom the Romans had long dismissed as mere barbarians. But to truly understand how this momentous event came to be, we must look back centuries before the sack of Rome, to the origins of the Goths, their struggles for survival, and the shifting dynamics of power that led them from scattered tribal groups to the architects of Rome's downfall. The Goths were not a singular, unified force from the beginning. Their origins trace back to the cold and mysterious lands of Scandinavia, possibly from what is now Gotland in modern Sweden. Historians debate the exact details of their migration, but by the early centuries AD, the Goths had made their way south into Eastern Europe, settling in areas near the Black Sea and along the Danube River. Unlike many other Germanic tribes, the Goths developed a complex society that blended warrior traditions with intricate alliances. Leadership was based not just on brute strength, but also on the ability to command loyalty through gift-giving and strategic marriages. These customs allowed them to form larger coalitions, making them formidable opponents on the battlefield. Their first recorded interactions with the Roman Empire were as early as the 3rd century AD, when Gothic warbands raided Roman territories along the Black Sea. At first, these incursions were seen as minor border skirmishes, but Rome, plagued by internal instability, often failed to respond decisively, allowing the Goths to grow bolder. By the late 4th century, a new and terrifying force emerged from the east, the Huns. These fierce warriors, possibly originating from the steppes of Central Asia, began sweeping across Europe, destroying everything in their path. In the 370s, they crushed the Greuthungi Goths, forcing their remnants, along with the Thervingi Goths, to flee westward toward the Roman Empire. Faced with annihilation, the Visigoths, under their leader Fritigern, pleaded with Rome for asylum. Emperor Valens agreed to let them settle within the empire, hoping to turn them into loyal subjects. However, corrupt Roman officials exploited the desperate Goths, overcharging them for food and mistreating them in ways that would soon prove catastrophic. In 378 AD, the situation exploded into full-scale war, culminating in the Battle of Adrianople. The Visigoths, enraged by years of mistreatment, crushed the Roman army and killed Emperor Valens himself. The battle marked a turning point. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history and demonstrated that the empire was no longer invincible. Following Adrianople, Rome struggled to contain the Gothic threat. Though treaties were signed, tensions remained high. Theodosius I, the new emperor, attempted to integrate the Goths into the empire, enlisting many as soldiers. However, this policy had unintended consequences. Among those who rose through the ranks was Alaric, a Visigothic leader who fought for Rome but grew disillusioned with his treatment. He had seen firsthand how the empire used and discarded its barbarian allies. When Theodosius died in 395, Alaric took matters into his own hands. He led his forces in a series of campaigns, raiding Roman territories and demanding recognition for his people. Despite temporary agreements, Rome continued to treat the Goths as expendable. When Alaric's demands for land and titles were ignored, he decided to march on the heart of the empire itself, Rome. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic confrontations, Alaric's struggle and Rome's desperation. As the 5th century dawned, the Roman Empire was a shadow of its former glory. Once the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world, Rome was now plagued by internal conflicts, power struggles, and economic decline. It was during this time of weakness that Alaric, the determined Visigothic king, saw his opportunity, not just for plunder, but for something far greater. Alaric did not wish to merely raid Rome. He wanted a place for his people within the empire, a secure homeland where they could thrive rather than being treated as outsiders. But time and time again, the Romans refused to grant him the recognition and respect he sought. This ongoing tension would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic sieges in ancient history. By 395 AD, the Western Roman Empire was in turmoil. Following the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the empire was officially divided between his two sons, Arcadius, who ruled the Eastern Roman Empire from Constantinople, and Honorius, who ruled the Western Roman Empire from Ravenna. Honorius, however, was a weak and ineffective ruler. He was heavily influenced by his court advisors, especially the ambitious general Stilicho, who had risen to power as Rome's chief military commander. Stilicho, himself of partly barbarian descent, was a shrewd strategist who understood the Gothic threat and sought to manage it through careful diplomacy rather than outright war. For a time, Stilicho was able to keep Alaric at bay, negotiating truces and even offering him military titles within the empire. But these fragile agreements were shattered when a series of events turned Rome's own leaders against each other. In 401, Alaric led his Visigothic forces into Italy, hoping to force the empire into granting his people land and resources. This was not an all-out war, but rather a calculated show of strength. His army swept through northern Italy, bypassing smaller cities and heading toward the capital. The Romans, caught off guard, panicked. Emperor Honorius fled from Milan to the more defensible city of Ravenna, abandoning Italy's heartland. Stilicho, now acting as Rome's last true defender, quickly assembled an army to counter Alaric. In 402 AD, the two forces clashed at the Battle of Pollentia, where Stilicho's troops managed to halt Alaric's advance. Though the battle ended inconclusively, it was enough to force the Visigoths to retreat. For the moment, Rome was safe. But Alaric had not been defeated. Despite his successes, Stilicho was despised by many in the Roman court, particularly the aristocracy, who resented his reliance on barbarian troops. His enemies spread rumors that he was conspiring with the Goths to seize power for himself. In 408 AD, Honorius was convinced to turn on his most capable general. Stilicho was arrested and executed, and in a single stroke, Rome lost its last great defender. Even worse, the emperor ordered the massacre of thousands of Gothic auxiliaries who had been serving in the Roman military. Their families, wives and children, were slaughtered in the streets. Survivors of the purge fled to Alaric's camp, bringing with them rage and a thirst for vengeance. Now, there was no more room for negotiation. Alaric, enraged by Rome's treachery, gathered his forces for a final march on the Eternal City. That winter, Alaric's army surrounded Rome, cutting off all supply routes and trapping the city's residents inside. For the first time in 800 years, Rome faced a direct siege by an invading force. Inside the city, chaos erupted, starvation and disease spread rapidly, and desperate citizens turned to bribery in an attempt to buy their way out. The Roman Senate, realizing they had no choice, sent envoys to negotiate with Alaric. When the envoys arrogantly warned Alaric that Rome had the strength to resist, he laughed and responded, "The thicker the grass, the easier it is to mow." Still, Alaric did not wish to destroy the city. He agreed to lift the siege in exchange for 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, silk garments, and thousands of pounds of pepper, a staggering ransom that emptied Rome's treasury. For the moment, the crisis was averted, but the peace would not last. After withdrawing from Rome, Alaric made one last attempt at diplomacy. He demanded that Emperor Honorius grant him control of land in northern Italy, where his people could settle peacefully. But Honorius, stubborn and short-sighted, refused. Enraged by this final rejection, Alaric decided there would be no more negotiations. In the summer of 410 AD, he marched on Rome once more. This time, there would be no ransom, no negotiations, no mercy. The sack of Rome was about to begin. The sack of Rome, a civilization in ashes. It was the evening of August 24th for 10 AD, a night that would be remembered for centuries. As darkness descended upon Rome, the people inside the city huddled in fear, their hearts pounding with uncertainty. The city had endured famine, betrayal, and political turmoil, but no one had expected what was about to unfold. For 3 years, Alaric and his Visigothic warriors had waged a relentless campaign against the Western Roman Empire. They had laid siege to Rome twice before, extracting massive ransoms and forcing humiliating concessions. Yet, the arrogant Emperor Honorius, safe in his fortified palace in Ravenna, still refused to grant Alaric's people a permanent homeland. On that fateful night, Alaric finally had enough. Somewhere along Rome's mighty walls, a gate was opened from within, perhaps by traitors, perhaps by desperate citizens hoping to end the siege. And just like that, the Eternal City, once the seat of an empire that had ruled the known world, was defenseless. The Visigoths stormed through the streets. Rome, which had stood unchallenged for over 800 years, was about to fall. As Alaric's warriors poured into the city, chaos erupted, buildings burned, statues were toppled, and centuries-old treasures were looted. The streets echoed with the screams of the desperate and the triumphant shouts of the invaders. But despite the sheer destruction, Alaric had strict orders for his men. Churches and religious sanctuaries were to be left untouched. This act of restraint would later be recorded by Christian historians as a sign of divine mercy, distinguishing this act from the mindless destruction inflicted by other barbarian invasions. Even as palaces and estates were ransacked, St. Peter's Basilica and other sacred sites remained unharmed. Many Romans, including women and children, sought refuge in these places of worship, believing that even the barbarian Visigoths would not dare desecrate them. In most cases, they were right. Yet, for thousands of others, there was no salvation. Elite Roman families, who had once lived in unimaginable luxury, were dragged from their mansions and sold into slavery. Senators, who had once commanded legions, were now powerless before the wrath of Alaric's warriors. The sack of Rome lasted for 3 days, though in the minds of its citizens, it must have felt like an eternity. When the dust settled, the city was left in ruins, stripped of much of its wealth. And while Rome itself was not physically destroyed, the psychological impact of its fall was immeasurable. For centuries, the Romans had believed their empire to be eternal, divinely sanctioned, untouchable. Even when foreign forces had attacked its borders, the idea of Rome itself being conquered had been unthinkable. But now, the impossible had happened. The news of Rome's fall spread like wildfire across the Mediterranean. In the Eastern Roman Empire, people were stunned. In North Africa, in Gaul, in Britain, wherever Rome's influence reached, the message was clear. The empire was no longer invincible. One of the most famous reactions came from Saint Jerome, a Christian scholar living in Bethlehem. Upon hearing of Rome's destruction, he wrote, "The city which had taken the world was itself taken. If Rome can perish, what is safe?" Even Saint Augustine, one of the most influential Christian thinkers of the time, was shaken by the event. But instead of seeing it as the end of the world, he wrote his famous work The City of God, arguing that earthly empires rise and fall, but faith endures. Despite the massive victory, Alaric was not celebrating. To him, the sack of Rome was not the end goal, but a means to an end. He still sought a permanent home for his people within the empire, a place where the Visigoths could settle without constant warfare. With Rome plundered, he turned his attention south, leading his army towards southern Italy, hoping to seize the province of Africa, the breadbasket of the empire. Control of Africa would have given Alaric the power to dictate terms to the Roman government in Ravenna. But fate had other plans. Before he could launch his next campaign, disaster struck. In late 10 AD, while traveling through southern Italy, Alaric suddenly fell ill. Accounts differ on the exact cause. Some say it was malaria. Others claim it was simply exhaustion from years of constant warfare. Within days, the great Gothic king was dead. Alaric's death was a devastating blow to the Visigoths, but his followers were determined to honor their leader with a burial worthy of a king. According to legend, his men diverted the course of the Busento River in southern Italy, burying Alaric and his treasures in the riverbed. Once the grave was sealed, the river was allowed to flow back over it, ensuring that no one would ever find the final resting place of the man who had conquered Rome. To this day, Alaric's tomb remains one of history's greatest mysteries, a lost treasure hidden beneath the waters of time. With their leader gone, the Visigoths were at a crossroads. Would they fade into obscurity, or would they find a new path? The answer lay in the next generation, the legacy of Rome's fall and the birth of a new world. When the Visigoths under Alaric stormed into Rome in 10 AD, they shattered more than just stone walls and golden statues. They shattered an illusion, the illusion that Rome, once the master of the world, was untouchable. But while the sack of Rome was a deeply symbolic event, it was not the end of the empire, at least, not yet. The Western Roman Empire struggled on for several more decades, battered by further invasions, political turmoil, and economic decline. However, the writing was on the wall. The fall of Rome was not a single moment in history, but a gradual unraveling that had been in motion for centuries. As the Visigoths moved on from Rome and began carving out their own kingdom, they, along with other barbarian groups, laid the foundations for a new world, medieval Europe. With Alaric gone, the Visigoths needed a new purpose. His successor, Ataulf, realized that constant warfare with Rome was not sustainable. Instead of trying to destroy the empire, the Visigoths began working toward a different goal: becoming part of it. Ataulf led his people into Gaul, modern-day France, where they struck a deal with the Western Roman authorities. In exchange for helping Rome fight off other barbarian invaders, the Visigoths were granted land and official recognition. This marked the beginning of the Visigothic kingdom, which would later expand into Hispania, modern Spain, and Portugal, becoming one of the dominant powers of post-Roman Europe. Interestingly, despite their role in sacking Rome, the Visigoths did not reject Roman culture. On the contrary, they embraced it. Many Visigothic leaders adopted Roman customs, laws, and even fashion. Over time, they would evolve from barbarians into rulers of a sophisticated, Latin-speaking kingdom. While the Visigoths settled in Gaul and Hispania, the Western Roman Empire was unraveling. The sack of Rome had severely weakened its prestige, and the empire's enemies sensed its vulnerability. Other Germanic groups, including the Vandals, Burgundians, and Franks, began carving out their own territories within Roman lands. In 455 AD, the Vandals, a Germanic tribe that had migrated all the way from northern Europe to North Africa, launched another devastating attack on Rome. This time, the destruction was even greater than that of Alaric's Visigoths. By the late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was little more than a fragmented collection of warlord-controlled territories. The final blow came in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was overthrown by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. With this, the Western Roman Empire was officially no more. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, remained intact. From its capital, Constantinople, the Eastern Romans watched as their Western counterparts fell into chaos. Under rulers like Justinian I 527–565 AD, the Byzantines even attempted to reconquer parts of the fallen Western Empire, launching massive campaigns to reclaim Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. However, these efforts were short-lived. By the 7th century, the dream of a united Roman world was gone forever. Yet, the Byzantine Empire would endure for nearly 1,000 more years, preserving much of Rome's legal, cultural, and intellectual heritage. It would influence medieval Europe, the Islamic world, and even the Renaissance centuries later. As Rome's influence faded in the West, new powers emerged. The Franks under Clovis I R. 481–511 AD established a powerful kingdom in Gaul, laying the foundation for what would become modern France. The Ostrogoths, another branch of the Gothic people, took control of Italy under the leadership of Theodoric the Great. The Anglo-Saxons, originally Germanic tribes from northern Europe, settled in Britain, forming the early medieval English kingdoms. Over time, these barbarian kingdoms would blend with Roman culture, adopting Latin-based languages, Christian traditions, and aspects of Roman law. In a way, Rome never truly died. It simply transformed. The sack of Rome in 410 AD was not just an attack on a city. It was a symbol of change. It marked the beginning of the transition from the ancient world to the medieval era. For centuries, historians have debated whether Rome fell or evolved. While the Western Roman Empire officially ended, its legacy lived on in many ways. Roman law and governance. Many of the Germanic kingdoms adopted aspects of Roman law, which later influenced modern European legal systems. The Latin language. Latin continued to evolve into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, forming the Romance languages of today. Christianity. The Roman Empire had embraced Christianity before its fall, and this faith became the dominant religion of Europe, shaping Western civilization for centuries. The idea of Rome. Even after its collapse, rulers throughout history, from Charlemagne to Napoleon, sought to recreate Rome's greatness, proving that its influence never truly disappeared. A world reborn. When Alaric sacked Rome, he likely did not realize that he was playing a role in the birth of a new world. He had begun as an enemy of Rome but ended up shaping the future of Europe. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was not the end of civilization, but a transformation. The structures that Rome left behind, its roads, cities, laws, and institutions, became the foundation upon which medieval Europe was built. Rome, the empire, may have fallen, but Rome, the idea, endures to this day.